Hashtag the science of motivation. Why you lose it and how to get it back. You had a plan. You were fired up. Maybe it was a new fitness goal, a business idea, a creative project, something that made you feel alive just thinking about it. And then, somewhere between day 1 and day 30, the fire went out. Not slowly. Almost overnight. You woke up one morning and the thing that once pulled you out of bed now felt like a weight pressing you into the mattress. Sound familiar? Here's what nobody tells you: that wasn't a personal failure. That was biology. And once you understand the science behind why motivation disappears, you gain the power to get it back, on demand, every single time. Motivation is not a personality trait. It is not something you either have or you don't. It is a neurochemical process, a measurable, predictable sequence of events happening inside your brain. And like any biological system, it can malfunction, it can be depleted, and most importantly, it can be restored. The reason most people never crack the code is because they treat motivation like a feeling to chase rather than a system to manage. Let's go back to basics. Inside your brain, there is a structure called the nucleus accumbens. This small cluster of neurons sits at the center of your brain's reward circuit and is primarily governed by a neurotransmitter called dopamine. Most people think dopamine is about pleasure. That is actually a widespread misconception. Dopamine is not the chemical of pleasure, it is the chemical of anticipation. It is what your brain releases when it predicts a reward is coming, not when the reward actually arrives. This distinction is everything when it comes to understanding motivation. When you first set a new goal, your brain goes wild with dopamine. The novelty, the possibility, the imagined outcome, all of it triggers a dopamine surge that feels like unstoppable energy. Researchers at Stanford University, including neuroscientist Andrew Huberman, have highlighted how this initial spike creates what feels like intrinsic drive. But here is the problem: that spike is temporary. As the goal becomes familiar, as the novelty wears off, dopamine levels normalize. The brain has essentially categorized this activity as known, and known things do not trigger the same anticipatory response. This is why week 3 of your gym routine feels nothing like week 1. There is another layer to this. Dopamine operates on a baseline system. Every time you experience a large dopamine spike, whether from social media, junk food, a Netflix binge, or even a huge motivational video, your baseline dopamine level drops below normal afterward. Think of it like a bank account. Every withdrawal brings the balance lower. When your baseline is depleted, everything feels flat, gray, and effortless motivation becomes essentially impossible. Psychologists and neuroscientists refer to this condition in its clinical form as anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure from things that once brought joy. Millions of people experience a subclinical version of this every single day without ever knowing it has a name. This is why the modern world is a motivation killer. We have engineered an environment saturated with high dopamine stimuli: smartphones, social media feeds, ultra-processed foods, instant entertainment. Each of these delivers a fast, powerful dopamine hit that your ancestors would never have encountered. The result is a generation of people with chronically depleted dopamine baselines, reaching for motivation and finding nothing there. It is not laziness. It is neurochemistry working exactly as designed, just in the wrong environment. So what about the people who seem endlessly motivated? The entrepreneurs, the athletes, the creators who never seem to lose their drive? Research suggests they are not experiencing more dopamine, they are managing it differently. They have, either consciously or through disciplined habit, learned to find motivation inside the process rather than outside it. That is the turning point we need to examine more closely. Psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying peak performance and motivation. His landmark research introduced the concept of flow, a state of complete absorption in a challenging task. What he found was remarkable. The people who sustained the highest levels of long-term motivation were those who structured their activities around a very specific challenge-to-skill ratio. Too easy, and the brain disengages. Too hard, and anxiety takes over. But when the challenge sits just slightly above your current ability level, the brain locks in. Flow is not just a pleasant experience, it is a neurological state that produces sustained dopamine without the crash. Here is the practical application. Most people set goals that are either so massive they feel paralyzed, or so routine they feel bored. Neither produces consistent motivation. What produces consistent motivation is progressive micro-challenges, small, measurable increases in difficulty that keep your brain in that sweet spot of engaged effort. This is why video games are so addictive. They are masterclasses in progressive challenge design. Every level is slightly harder than the last. The motivation is not in the prize at the end, it is built into the structure of the journey. Now let's talk about identity, because this is where motivation transforms from a temporary state into something far more durable. Psychologist and author James Clear, in his work on habit formation, makes a critical distinction between outcome-based motivation and identity-based motivation. Outcome-based motivation says, "I want to run a marathon." Identity-based motivation says, "I am a runner." On the surface, these sound similar. In practice, they function completely differently inside your brain. When your motivation is tied to an outcome, every day that you don't make visible progress becomes a threat to your motivation. Your brain evaluates the situation and asks, "Is the reward still coming?" When the answer feels uncertain, dopamine drops and motivation evaporates. But when your motivation is rooted in identity, each action becomes self-reinforcing. You are not running to get somewhere, you are running because that is who you are. The action confirms the identity, and the identity sustains the action. Research on behavioral change consistently shows that people who reframe their goals as identity statements maintain motivation significantly longer than those focused purely on external outcomes. There is also a critical physiological component to motivation that almost nobody discusses: the role of the stress response system. When cortisol, the primary stress hormone, is chronically elevated, it directly suppresses dopaminergic function. In simple terms, chronic stress kills motivation at the biological level. This is why people going through burnout describe feeling completely empty of drive. It is not psychological weakness. Their neurochemistry has been compromised by sustained stress. Sleep deprivation amplifies this effect dramatically. Studies from the University of California, Berkeley have shown that even a single night of poor sleep reduces dopamine receptor sensitivity the following day, making you physiologically less capable of feeling motivated regardless of your mindset. This means that the foundational elements of motivation recovery are not motivational speeches or vision boards. They are sleep, movement, and stress regulation. Consistent physical exercise has been demonstrated in dozens of peer-reviewed studies to increase baseline dopamine levels, improve receptor sensitivity, and enhance prefrontal cortex function, the part of your brain responsible for long-term thinking, impulse control, and goal pursuit. Morning sunlight exposure, cold water, deliberate breathing, these are not wellness trends. They are evidence-backed tools that directly restore the neurochemical conditions required for sustained motivation. Let's bring all of this together into a clear, actionable framework. First, you must protect your dopamine baseline. This means auditing your environment and reducing high-stimulation, low-value activities, particularly the ones you reach for when you feel bored or uncomfortable. This is not about deprivation. It is about restoration. When you lower the constant noise of cheap dopamine, the meaningful things in your life begin to feel rewarding again. Second, redesign your goals around progressive challenge. Stop chasing the finish line and start engineering the journey. Break your objective into escalating stages, each one slightly beyond what you currently find comfortable. Make progress measurable, visible, and frequent. Your brain needs evidence of movement to sustain belief in the destination. Third, anchor your motivation to identity. Ask yourself not, "What do I want to achieve?" but, "Who do I need to become?" Write that identity down.